We are looking this week at Season 2, Episode 6, Melora, and I believe I'm going to hand to Kat for an episode summary. Please, Kat.
You are indeed, and thank you, as always, to Wikipedia for providing a nice, concise-ish summary for us. Starfleet Officer Melora Pazlar, played by Daphne Ashbrook, who is the sister of Dana Ashbrook, who's in Twin Peaks as Bobby Briggs. An Elasian whose species physiology is incompatible with the strength of artificial gravity used in most humanoid communities, including Deep Space Nine, arrives on the station. She must use external mechanical apparatus to exist comfortably on the station. Because of her physical condition, Melora is argumentative, even rude. I'm going to take issue with that, in insisting that she not be shown any undue accommodation. Nevertheless, Dr Bashir, Alexander Siddig, sees through Melora's barriers and the two become romantically involved. Meanwhile, just as Quark is about to conclude a deal over some historical relics with a man named Ashrock, Fallet Cott walks into the bar. The two have history, with Cott declaring to Quark that he is on DS9 to settle certain debts. However, when questioned by Security Chief Odo, Cott denies any ill intentions towards the Ferengi. Bashir develops a medical procedure that could allow Melora to comfortably walk without the help of any of the equipment she currently uses. Even after successfully participating in tests of Bashir's new engineering technique, Melora has misgivings. If she goes through with the procedure, she will no longer be able to live in the low-gravity environment of her homeworld. Lieutenant Jadzia Dax, during a survey mission with Melora to the Gamma Quadrant, compares her predicament to that of the Little Mermaid. Fallet Cott attacks Quark in his quarters, but Quark offers him 199 bars of gold-pressed latinum in exchange for his life. Cott takes the deal and they go to meet Ashrock at the airlock. Sorry, there's lots of rhyming bits in this. Quark's deal is closed, but Cott shoots Ashrock and takes the relics in addition to the latinum. Cott forces the Ferengi to go with him, and they come across Melora and Dax, who are returning from their survey. Cott takes all three hostage aboard the runabout Orinoco. Commander Benjamin Sisko orders the runabout to be held in a tractor beam. Cott demands that they be released, shooting Melora to prove his point. Sisko lets them go, but takes Bashir and Chief Miles O'Brien with him to the runabout Rio Grande. They pursue Orinoco through the Bajoran wormhole. Cott orders Dax to fire on the Rio Grande, but she refuses. She notices that Melora is not only still alive, but crawling toward a console controlling the ship's gravity. In her element, after shutting down the gravity, Melora overpowers Cott, who is taken into custody. After finally deciding against going through with Julian's procedure, Melora and Julian enjoy the Klingon chef's serenade at the restaurant where they had their first date.
Congratulations, Kat. What a wonderful summary, as always. And I will cap...
Artfully read from Wikipedia.
Thank you, Wikipedia contributors, as always, even though I will let you go back to that description that you flagged in there, but I just want to weirdly, in a way that would delight David Lynch, note another Twin Peaks collection. The Klingon chef is played by actor Ron Taylor, who played Coach Wingate in 2 episodes of Twin Peaks as well.
Oh, amazing!
So, in a wonderful circle, there are 2 Twin Peaks connections in this episode. And as Kat noticed in the setup, this is our first episode since David Lynch sadly passed away at the start of this year. So, we just remember a true weird one. And thank you for your contributions, David. So, thank you very much.
Before we get into first impressions, I wanted to note that the episode itself actually never uses the words disabled, disability, or impairment. Melora uses the word handicap once, and that's now widely considered to be an old-fashioned term. It's largely fallen out of use when talking about people with disabilities. Throughout my notes for this episode, I have used disability and impairment, because I think that impairment most accurately describes Melora's needs, because she is functionally disabled in the environment that she finds herself in. She isn't disabled on her home world, but when she's in a G1, a 1 gravity, which is the Earth gravity, which everywhere in Star Trek miraculously has. All Federation planets, but also any planet that you go to, which isn't Alasia, usually has 1G gravity, because the special effects for having lower gravity is really expensive.
That is the stone cold truth.
Yeah, and if you make the gravity heavier, it just makes everyone slower and tireder, so there's no advantage in it. So she is functionally impaired by being in Federation areas, in Starfleet spaces. I also wanted to know before we dig into the episode that I consider myself to have a disability. It's sometimes termed a dynamic impairment. I've got chronic fatigue syndrome, which means that I experience unusual and extreme fatigue after even slight exertion, as well as chronic pain associated with exertion. My experience of this episode is therefore very heavily affected by my own experiences, especially that Melora is always tired in normal gravity. I've explained to friends before that on days when I'm extremely fatigued, it feels as if someone's turned the gravity up. My limbs are heavier, everything takes more effort. I get tired very, very quickly. And I think that Daphne Ashbrook really nails it in this episode. She does a very good job of looking as though what must be normal exertion for her is actually exhausting for Melora. So my take is heavily coloured by that. There's no two ways around it. So I am biased in that respect. But also, I'm not an expert. Language and ideas which I believe to be current and correct in the modern day, but it is completely possible that some of my own opinions and ideas are outdated and there's more that I need to learn. So please don't consider my take on this episode to be the final word, even when I'm peppering my own experiences amongst my opinions, because my view is completely subjective and, let's face it, fueled by wine.
Thank you so much, Kat, and thank you obviously for taking the podcast into confidence, because that is something that, we discussed in the setup, and I said you don't have to share and if you don't want to. This is meant to be a fun podcast where we talk about an old show, but Kat has very graciously decided to share their, situation with us, which I'm very grateful for.
I think the first time I watched the episode through without having gone through it scene by scene and broken down what's said and by whom, I did feel disgruntled with the representation of Melora as a person with an impairment. She seemed to be irritated by some of the help that she's offered. I thought that she was being spiky when well-meant crew members make mistakes. But watching it through a second time, I think that she's bloody right. And I think that my first reading of her was really unfair. I think that the character actually responds to the situations that she's in very well indeed. She's cut out of a meeting. She's patronized by some people. I think that she's actually written very, very well when she's experiencing that. There are a lot of subtleties in her character, her dialogue and her performance, which I think it took a second viewing for me to properly appreciate. And I think that there's something very appropriate in how, because problems arise in the story due to the world not being set up to accommodate Melora's needs, she has necessarily to be the focus of discussion and attention by the crew. If she's going to be there, she has to be talked about. Preparations have to be made. And the fact of Melora being the focal point of the episode mirrors this. If the world of Deep Space Nine were easy for her to live in her body as it is, the episode would be telling a completely different story about her. And I think any viewer who finds themselves irritated by the centering of an entire A-plot around one minor character's disability could do well to consider how irritating it must be for Melora to have her entire existence diminished to the sum of her problems that she represents. She's an extremely accomplished ensign, and the whole episode is about whether she's going to be able to walk or not. And I feel certain that the writers are aware of this. They consider who the disabled character is versus what she represents to the people around them, and I think they do it very well. But I think that a 45-minute episode is a very difficult medium in which to get across all of the nuance that's required for the kind of personal growth they want her and other characters to go through. Another thing that I want to note before we start, there's a really long beginning to this episode, I apologise. Star Trek is often made with the assumption that in the future, Captain Pike notwithstanding, disabilities will be done away with by technology. And this story demonstrates one example of how a complete universal doing away with disability will never be the case. It's just not possible. And I really appreciate it for that. Another good example of this in Star Trek is the Einar, a race who are all blind in Enterprise, and especially in Strange New Worlds, the character of Hemmer, who's played by a blind actor. And this episode was directly in conversation with the Next Generation episode, Ethics, where Worf becomes temporarily disabled. And it was handled fairly badly by the writers. I think it's widely agreed that it is not a well-written episode, Worf versus the Blue Barrel. So Evan Sommers had seen that and wanted to write some of those. Yes. And I think he's managed that. Sorry, that was my first impression. Tim, what was yours?
Yeah, possibly not as invested, but obviously you have an interpretation of what happened in the story that I don't. It is interesting. I was searching my memories, trying to remember, because I saw this when it was broadcast. I was searching my memories, and I couldn't bring anything up except for a vague memory of just not caring about the fact that
Yeah.
Bashir had a romance subplot, because I was very young when I was watching this, because it was 30 years ago, and I was just like, I don't care, I don't care, I don't care. So I found this episode largely unremarkable, and annoyingly, I can't remember my feelings about Melora, except just thinking it was a novel idea. Wow, okay, this is something new. My initial impression on rewatching it and how Melora interacted was complete sympathy. I felt straight away, that her reactions to how the crew approached her were partially understandable, because she didn't want all this coddling, and also partially she must have encountered that on every previous assignment. And she does say later in the episode, I constantly get this disbelief amongst commanding officers that I can do basic duties. I can, So I almost felt, and it is credit to Daphne Ashbrook, that she immediately conveys instantly this experience of a resigned but committed person who's just like, I go through this crap all the time. Please don't take it personally, but I need you to do X, Y, Z. I don't need you to mess with it, and I need you to take me seriously. Do what I ask, no more. And I just immediately bought into that. And I just thought she delivered it with such conviction that I was immediately won over. So I loved that. Everything else, as we dig through it, I am less convinced about. And as I said in the setup with you, I've gone back and forth on how I feel about this whole episode a few times, and I feel like, as always, this conversation with you and chat is going to help solidify in my mind how I feel about this episode, because I don't know where I fall on this episode. But
I think
I
it will for
love
me
her.
too, because I feel
Great.
really ambivalent. I think there were bits of it that certainly a second time round I really appreciated. I'm really glad we're in there. And some bits I'm just like, what the hell we did? Was Rick Berman in the room when this was being written?
Berman!
Oh god, I'm sorry for any good things the guy's ever done, but he is just my punching bag now for whenever something goes wrong or is objectionable in an episode. I assume that it was his fault.
And it will be interesting, as we all know, Kat has had some spoilers through the memes, so he's aware that Berman is a bit of a punching bag for all of the Trek community. But it will be interesting to see, as you work your way through episodes, how your perception changes, and as we learn, what Rick was involved in the decision making of as an executive producer, but alongside Michael Piller, and I can't remember if Ira Steven Behr was.
Ira Steven Behr, I think, he's an exec producer on this.
He is.
Yeah.
So it's that, and then I think Michael moved away, and then it was just Rick and Ira. So it'll be interesting to see your perception of how Rick's creative control of the show affects it. But that is for a series finale in about 2,000 years. So let's. And did it feel like accurate? Did it feel accurate and representative? I mean, I guess a lot of it was telegraphed for telly, but.
Yeah, definitely. I think certainly for me with my fatigue, it felt very real. She does a very good job of breathing slightly more heavily after exerting herself. There are moments when you can just, even though the film is relatively low quality on Deep Space Nine compared with, say, TNG, you can see her jaw tensing. There are moments when her face tense, even when the actor doesn't have any lines, when she's within the background while other characters are talking about her. If she is standing, you can see her sway very slightly. You can see her jaw tense. She's thinking every moment about how much effort the character is having to put forth. And I really like it. I think it's a really well done. I don't know whether she had someone she consulted about this and about how it would look for someone who struggled to walk. But I think that she hit the nail on the head. She does it very, very well. In the very next scene, Bashir enters Melora's room and asks about the field actuator, the thing that will make gravity lower for her. He very obviously wants to see her experience it for himself. And she says that for me, it's like slipping into a hot tub at the end of the long day, which I think there are various points when she says things that are very related to human Earth culture. She isn't human. She isn't from Earth. She does not know what it's like to slip into a hot tub because she lives in a world where you float constantly. It's unlikely that they lower themselves into hot water as a recreational activity. So she knows that this thing exists, and she knows what it means to Bashir enough to use that as an analogy. And I don't know if that's deliberate or just lazy writing. Whether the writers thought about this is an Earth thing. She's cosmopolitan. She knows about this. She's read into it. Or whether they just put it in thinking, the audience will know it. We can just pretend that the translator put in something appropriate.
let's say it's both of those, and a third thing, which is she's actually learned certain expressions that will allow her to relate to well-meaning but clueless people to give them
Yes.
common ground to work with her, which it's probably a horrendously mentally laborious act, but I imagine you have to think, okay, how am I going to communicate this concept to a well-meaning person who has no frame of reference?
Yeah,
And
in the
then,
same way that I took to telling friends it's as if someone's turned the gravity up, because that adequately describes the feeling of all of my limbs suddenly being much heavier. Yeah, that's a really good thought. That it's something she's very consciously, deliberately worked at to make communication easier. Yeah. Bashir intrudes, picking up a picture of Melora and a man who's
intrudes.
He just walks.
He's just in there, isn't he?
He just wanders in. He just wanders in and picks up this photo that belongs to her. It's of her and a man of roughly her age, floating, presumably on her home planet. And he starts prodding for whether he's a husband or a boyfriend. And Melora has none of it. She ignores the questions and just starts to say, if you came here for an apology, I apologize. And I don't think that she means to, but I think she's just making clear that she doesn't want to hurt his feelings.
Yeah.
I don't think she should have to apologize, and I don't think that she should, but she's extending an olive branch to this guy.
Exactly. I got it in, again as that learned language of, I know you feel slighted on some level, and that I need to make conciliatory noises that I don't really feel is necessary, but this is part of the diplomacy of people who don't have my condition and have been affronted by my behaviour. And it's just, again, I just felt like here is somebody who has gone through this 100 times with 100 other well-meaning people, and just to get on with her job, she has to placate people who have been offended because she hasn't fallen into their expectations of it. I mean, I'm sure I am preaching to the choir here, but that was my impression.
No, absolutely. I think you're 100% correct there. And at this point, the scene takes a turn. Bashir replies, I'm sure you never set out to attack anyone personally, but you do seem to attack a lot. And this is immediately after she's apologized to him for, no one has actually said what she's apologizing to him for, and that she should call him Julian because he is no longer her doctor. Okay, without consulting her, he's decided he's not going to be her doctor anymore, so that they can have a friendship.
An inappropriate conversation?
What the fuck? Does she have a clinician on board the station anymore?
That's a really good point, because if Bashir steps back from this, that's something we haven't talked about.
There isn't a regular nurse, is there? There's no one else in there with it.
You cannot get a second opinion on DS9 because there's only one chief physician. There's no other physicians.
She injures herself. Fuck it. Someone Odo can deal with it. No doctor now. I'm Julian. What the fuck?
What a horrible concept.
But also, he says, you attack often. At no point has she done anything close to attacking anyone.
No.
She hasn't even been spiky with them. She's explained why she feels the way that she feels. She has asked for reasonable accommodations. She hasn't done anything in any way offensive, and he is accusing her of attacking. My guess, and it is only a guess, is that this is something that the other writers and not Sommers himself put in, so as to forward the plot about her and Julian getting closer together, to forward the plot about her being too independent, as if that were a thing.
I also wondered if it was an attempt to put us in an audience's shoes in 1993, where they might have totally innocently interpreted Melora as, yes, aggressive, abrasive, things that we would now take as, okay, this is somebody asserting themselves in a situation they know. We would say, well, you're just being rude to our beloved main cast. So I think it's that. I think it is a clumsy attempt to say, okay, well, let's see things from Bashir's point of view, because he's just tried to do lots of lovely things for this person.
I think it might be, but the way that it's framed,
I didn't say it was good.
Right.
Yeah,
I think if he'd done that and then she had made a good reasoned argument to actually, what did I say that was attacking?
Yeah.
What have I done that was offensive?
Yeah.
All I have done is advocate for myself in this situation where I didn't have a friend. But she doesn't do that, unfortunately. They've got to push the episode along, and yes, he says that she should call him Julian as he's no longer her doctor, and she says, so you've decided I need a friend, and he goes, was that an attack? Which I quite like. It's a little bit camp and a little bit catty. Was that an attack? You see, you do it so well. It's such a charm. It's hard to tell. But he's trying to school her. on something that she does not need to be schooled on.
So
He needs to
horrendous.
learn his fucking place. She has done nothing wrong, and she has not attacked anyone. And he is being an absolute arse who's walked into this woman's room with the intention of asking her on a date. It's peak Bashir at his worst. He says, all these broad shots you fire, they're just your way of keeping the rest of the universe on the defensive. It has to be. You're too good at it. And I think that maybe if the episode were longer, or if she had been here for several episodes, there would have been space to tell a story of someone who is a bit defensive, someone who refuses help, even when it would actually objectively be in her benefit to take that help. There hasn't been an opportunity to do that yet. She has reasonably refused help when she didn't want it. She has said what she does want additionally to what they've given her when they haven't done enough for her. And I think that they could have told a good story about someone who has pushed people away too much. And I think that there are a lot of people in the world who face difficulties of various kinds and who don't want to be seen as needy, don't want to come to rely on others, genuinely feel aggrieved by how they've been patronised or hurt in the past, and isolate themselves. And some people become embittered when they do that, and they prefer not to spend time with others. But the dialogue that she's had in this episode doesn't support that as a reading of her character. I think they really wanted to tell that as a story, and they just don't have a basis on which to do it yet. They needed her to be more actually spiky early on. But I think because they were trying to show a picture of what life is like for her and what her difficulties are, I think they could have done one thing or the other well. And I think that they've done well at showing what her difficulties are and the problems of having to navigate other people when dealing with those difficulties. You can't also have her being too spiky and too isolated and needing to reach out to a friend. It's too soon. I feel as if this scene was written to try and both level the moral playing field between Melora and Bashir, to give a sense that she has been unfair to him, so that when they do embark on a relationship, the power dynamics feel a bit more even. The writer Evan Carlos Sommers has said in the Star Trek Deep Space Nine companion, I get a lot of this information from Memory Alpha, by the way, thank you to them, that Siddig El-Fadl had been asking where his character was going to find a girlfriend, given that Dax was apparently off the table. And this is part of the reason for Melora's character being female. She could have been a male character, they made her female, so that relationship with Bashir could happen. So it's possible that the scene wasn't crowbarred in by producers just wanting to soften her character, but that it had to be in there as part of the flow of the episode, and that Sommers, the man who wrote it deliberately to be a depiction of a disabled person, was on board with that. He also said, this is unpleasant, zero gravity sex with Bashir was a prime element to the story in my mind. You've written a beautiful episode in many ways, Evan Carlos Sommers, but you are not without sin. Oh my God, dude! I don't. Did the 90s audience want a zero G sex scene for Bashir, Tim? You didn't. You were a kid.
30 years on, I don't want it. I still have to put up with it, you know? No, I really didn't. All I can think is, yeah, okay, Carlos has written a great episode, but he is a TV writer, and therefore, at the back of his mind, however unconscious, is always, I've got to have something provocative, I've got to have something exciting and out there, and maybe it's zero G sex, you know, or maybe somebody shoots somebody. Oh, that happens too. Great. Okay, so I think, yeah, in the 90s, you could craft the most beautiful episode of drama and introspection, and you still have to have, you know, somewhere some producer or network executive is going to go, okay, so when does somebody fuck or die? And he's like, oh, I guess I've got to put that in.
Some producer, we know which producer. So, yeah, apparently in this case the writer himself wanted it, which if it's a way to make your mark on the series, definitely no one's going to. Mind you, I say no one's going to forget the episode with zero G sex. It didn't stick out in your mind.
It didn't. No. Insofar as I remember not liking a romance episode with Bashir. That's it. So it sort of stuck in my mind for the complete opposite reason. But I was very young, you know.
But I don't know. I think young you was onto something. We don't need a Bashir girlfriend episode. Nobody needs that. Least of all Bashir. He needs to grow as a person. Anyway,
please, you know, give us some closing thoughts. What do you take away from this episode?
I think just that, as you said at the start, I feel ambivalent about it. There are some scenes and some parts of the episode that I really like. Partly with an intellectual, a kind of looking into why it is the way it is view. I love the representation. I think the character's very well written. I enjoyed it as a story. It was entertaining enough, but having Bashir's needing a love interest got a crowbarred in there.
Really was.
I don't know. I think for me it lessens what could have been a better rounded story for her. And I am wondering how many more Bashir girlfriends we're going to go through before the show ends. Which no one can tell me. I'm not asking. I'm just wondering.
Thank you, Kat, for understanding, and thank you, chat, for understanding the restrictions thereof. But yeah, I can't fault you for any of that. I think you raised some really, really good points. If anything, I think you are very forgiving of this episode. Was I came away now having listened to you describe it so brilliantly that I just found that if anything, the good bits of the episode stand out because everything around it is just fairly mid. I hate to say it, but it's just middling.
Yeah, I think you're probably right that as a Star Trek episode, it probably won't stand up aside from the disability rep. It doesn't necessarily stand out in my mind as being anything remarkable. There wasn't any fantastic dialogue. There wasn't. Yeah.
There wasn't.
No, sorry, I interrupted you to say that. But
no. All you're doing is completely reinforcing what I said. It wasn't good world building for DS9. There wasn't much for any of the other characters to do. The B plot was pretty unremarkable. The solution, I'm going to shout out Nige Mouse in the chat who said he found the solution cheesy even by Star Trek standards. And it did feel a little bit like she flourishes in low gravity. Let's give her a gravity solution to get out of it. It's just like that was such a telegraphed Star Trek solution, you know. It was great, but it was so obviously telegraphed. You know, Chekhov's gravity generator. So and not Anton Chekhov. Not Pavel Chekhov, but Anton Chekhov.
Yeah.
So I feel like
that's a good point. They never made a Chekhov joke like that in Star Trek.
It's right there. Chekhov's phaser.
Chekhov hides a phaser somewhere in the room.
Exactly.
God damn.
So it's bizarre because the disability Melora's storyline is great. Everything around it, not. So it's so jarring. And ultimately, I just come away from this episode being, if some of the stuff around it had also been pretty well written, as we know Deep Space Nine can do, this would have been a standout episode. In reality, her storyline was dogged by everything else being really subpar. So ultimately, I came away from this episode just dissatisfied.
I do also feel a little sad that the idea was floated that she might be the or that a character like her might have been the science officer. To have had a story like hers develop over more time, they could have given better shrift to the cultural aspects of it, the disability aspects of it. They could have had her in conversation with other disabled characters. There could have been so many things that they could do, but that desire that her impairment be about gravity being too strong meant that they would have to have her in low gravel all the time and very deliberately not show it because it was too expensive. It would have been a big barrier, but I wish they'd adapted and had a differently disabled character because I think I trust Evan Carlos Summers to do that good writing on this subject.
It was there,
I wish
wasn't
I'd be able to see more from him. Yeah.
It was there. Sadly, it was not to be. We should give thanks that we got this episode. As flawed as it is, it still had at its heart a good thread and a good character.
And a very good and very good actor playing that character.
And that's exactly it. And well delivered by Daphne Ashbrook, who wonderfully excelled as the only on-screen companion to the 8th Doctor, Paul McGann, in the 1996 TV movie. So, yay!
God damn, I'd not remembered that. I'm going to have to rewatch that.
Amazing sci-fi credentials. She's been in Trek and Doctor Who, a rare accomplishment. Well, right. The big clock on the screen.
Oh God, it's so late.
2 hours, 46 minutes.
Thank you for indulging me in all of my monologuing and all of my many asides in this episode. I've really enjoyed watching this one. I've really enjoyed discussing it with you, Tim. And I'm very glad that you took away from it a lot of the things that I saw in it only on a second viewing. You did good.
I'm going to put that down to just good script writing. You know, Star Trek is good for opening your eyes to other perspectives. So well done them. I'm going to thank chat, as always, for being with us and throwing in. We haven't had much chance to go to you because we've had so much to say, but I'm really grateful to everyone in chat for joining us. We always do appreciate it, and nobody spoiled anything. Not even me, as tempted as I am.
Sorry, I'm just going to read out one quote from the indoor cat. I'm sorry your attempt to turn me into not my species anymore didn't work, but I'm still me. Oops. That's a really nice and slightly cynical summary of the episode. I like it.